Hello and good morning to you all. It's Sunday as I record this, which is a nice day to be recording things. Nice day to be kind of having a chat mid-morning on a Sunday. I kind of like that. And I thought I'd just drop in here just to kind of have a think about stuff. Um, and largely because I was delivering some training. Don't like calling it training. I really had that conversation before in other places. I don't know whether you can ever train people. You just tell them stuff, and they kind of take it on board and take it with them, and do with it what they will. So I don't like the idea of training or trainer. I like the idea of just having conversations in rooms and seeing where it gets us. And that's exactly what we did. I was in South Tyneside talking to some of their children's practitioners from a range of places, mainly social workers, but from a range of places. And it was an interesting conversation. And I sometimes find that when I'm delivering these kind of things, it's not often what I say. I suppose what I say is a kind of bit of a conversation starter. It's the conversations that happen between practitioners, and they're wonderful. They're hearing those conversations, being party to those conversations about things that they're dealing with and managing, and then feeling the room kind of come together and to kind of try and solve problems. And I think we talked about this a little bit actually, and that's one of the things that's really interesting in terms of kind of working from home, isn't it? I wonder how many of those conversations we kind of lose. Um, Not that I think working from home is a bad thing. I think working from home is an absolutely fabulous thing. Right job for the right place at the right time and all that kind of stuff. But we were talking about difficult conversations, um, and this is a little section of that, and it's dealing with anger. And I think sometimes we uh, experience directed towards us, or directed towards what we represent, or directed towards the messages that we have to deliver. We experience some anger some of the time. I don't know whether it's as often as um, we might think. It might not be. I don't know, but certainly it's a facet, isn't it? And I think anger is an interesting thing. I like to think of anger. As anger's the emotion, anger's the internal bit, anger's the feeling. It's a deeply seated um, reflex response that has kept us alive for um, centuries in terms of our evolutionary history. So anger is the internal emotion, and then it manifests itself, doesn't it, as aggression or frustration, or even going quiet. People who are angry sometimes go quiet. But I think we would all kind of, however we want to construct that, we'd all kind of think of anger as being a fairly kind of destructive emotion, even though maybe it isn't. And that takes a bit of unpicking, maybe elsewhere for another time. But is it destructive? Is it helpful? Is it supportive? I'd argue, I suppose it's the direction you kind of channel your anger in. And there are some interesting kind of thoughts to kind of just ponder here, I suppose. One of them being that this is Harry Ferguson talks about how we co-construct um, some of the problems that we kind of face. That isn't exactly what he says, but it's that kind of thing, that he says that kind of lots of social work relationships are conducted in a or transacted is the word he uses through hostility, through mistrust, through fear. And sometimes that's our mistrust. And we had a conversation about this, which is really interesting. Sometimes that's our mistrust of people just as much as their kind of mistrust of us. And I think we have to acknowledge the role we have in that. We take into these arrangements, into these conversations, we take who we are, how we're feeling, not necessarily how we're feeling about the person, but how we're just feeling in general about things. I mean, it could even be life stuff, can't it? So we have to acknowledge that if people are getting angry, people are getting upset, people are getting distressed, frustrated with us, then we're part of that puzzle. it doesn't necessarily mean we're doing something wrong. It just means we're part of that puzzle. It could be the message we're delivering. It could be whatever. So we have to accept that. And if we accept this, I like this idea of anger as a destructive emotion. Just to play with it for a little bit. And if we think about Freud, Freud would think about this in terms of, and this is just something I've just been reminded of recently, and it was a bit of a kind of watershed moment, I suppose, where something comes back to you from your past education. Freud talks about Thanatos. He talks about Thanatos being the death instinct, that we've got this death drive that impulsively moves us towards, unconsciously even, moves us towards anger and the manifestation through aggression or destruction or self-sabotage. So it pushes us in the direction of this drive towards death almost. And the other side of that being eros, this concept of eros. So Thanatos, this idea of this death drive, manifests itself in resistance. We actually push back against the very things that could help us, because he says we've got this drive, this death drive. So we push back against the very things, the very people that could help us. Now, anger is one of those things that we get angry for a number of reasons, but one of them that kind of fits with this is when somebody is getting in between you and the thing that you want to do, or in between you and happiness, in your joy and delight. We get angry and frustrated. I get that. Do you know what I mean? I understand that. I understand that as a human being. If you're getting in between me and the thing that I want to do, I'm not going to be very happy about that. So we've got that aspect of it. This idea that we become angry because people are getting in our way, and we have to acknowledge, don't we? Sometimes, as social workers, we are getting in people's way. And one of the other things that I think anger kind of is rooted in sometimes, there's this idea called cognitive bandwidth, which I talk quite a bit about at times on my self-care shorts channel. And this idea of bandwidth is that we've only got so much cognitive bandwidth to deal with so many things. So if you've got a person in front of you, a parent or a teenager or whatever, and they're dealing with a range of things. They're dealing with the emotional content of their lives. Maybe they're dealing with the fact that they don't know what's coming next or what their future holds or any of these things. They're dealing with all this stuff. They've not got enough cognitive bandwidth left to kind of think about, I don't know, where they might live next or how to be a better parent or whatever it is. You know what I mean? They've not got the cognitive bandwidth left, to do that. And I always give the example of me, if you listen to me talk before, you'll know I always say I'm a lifelong dieter, always trying to lose a bit of weight, carrying an extra bit of timber. And I'll say this, we know how this works, because if I start a new diet on a Monday, which is highly likely if it's a Monday, if everything goes all right during the day, I can stick to it. But suddenly, if things start to encroach and things are difficult, or I haven't slept well, or I've got too much to do, or I've got a lot to do, suddenly I don't have the cognitive bandwidth to think about the healthy lunch. I just grab whatever, So we kind of know how this works. So anyway, we've got this, whether it's Thanatos, whether it's Freud's death instinct, we do have this biological drive towards certain behaviors, anger being one of them. And sometimes it's that self-sabotage of actually the very thing that if I could engage with it would help me. I'm not going to engage with that. So, and many versions of self-sabotage. And again, something else that I'm trained to be a counsellor at the minute. I'm in second year of that. And borrowing stuff from last week's session, because it was a really fascinating one, and I came across this Madow's MADOW signs of anger, and the fact that anger can be a direct manifestation. And I suppose that's the stuff we go to when we think about anger, behavioral stuff, physical, a physical attack, physical aggression, or physical presence. I think sometimes use anger drives people to have a physical presence. They stand up, they make themselves bigger, or verbal aggression. But then there are things that Maddow talks about, which is thinly veiled manifestations. Just being a bit irritable or being a bit argumentative, not out there, not outlandish anger, but just those kind of things. Maybe being a bit sulky about stuff. My wife would say I do that. Get sulky instead of getting angry. Or just being disruptive in the conversation or whatever, diverting things. And then and alongside that, similar to, talks about indirect behavior. And indirect anger could be like, if you suppress that, I suppose, being angry inside and not manifesting it. So I'd argue that manifesting any emotion can be quite healthy if it's done this seems like a contradiction, but if it's done in a controlled way, if we don't do that, if we don't somehow manage that anger in one way or another, be that through something less dramatic than getting them blown up and getting angry, then it could lead to it leads to all sorts of kind of physical health stuff. It can make you feel very guilty that you're feeling that way. Those kind of things. It's very exhausting being angry all the time. So there are lots of manifestations of it, and there's lots of ways. There's lots of ways to deal with anger, but I'm gonna just cover some brief ones, I suppose, here. But so just to give you some ideas. The one way to avoid anger is to use collaborative language, because one of the things that generates an angry response is when somebody feels as though you are kind of having a go at them, or you're pushing the issue onto them, kind of making it feel as though they're to kind of blame. And I'm sure you wouldn't do that directly, overtly, but sometimes the way we say things or the way we come across, because remember, we find it very difficult to hide that emotional content or that body language. We find it very hard to hide that. So sometimes how you come across can kind of be problematic. So collaborative language, and I've talked about this in other places, but just to remind you, if you've heard me talk about this before, two sociologists, Weinstein and Deutschberger, they've got some other interesting stuff out there. Have a read. They say that "we" is one of the most seductive words of the English language, and the inclusion of or replacing "you" or "I" with "we" or "us" is really seductive to people. It really kind of draws them into a collaborative kind of nature of things. So they want to collaborate if we want to collaborate. I'm not saying this is going to be a silver bullet and turn the thing around straight away, but if we can manifest an environment of cooperation by using words like what are we going to do to see how we can take this forward? It would be great for us if we could figure out how to move forward with this. How can we see if that thing will work? How can we give that a go so everybody's safe? So it's much better than, well, how are you going to make that work? Or how are you going to make sure that when you do that everybody's safe? So just changing those words can be kind of really, really powerful. And the other thing that diverts anger, and again, this is something I've talked about before. I've got a video up online about it. I'll think on and share it. Is thinking about a guy called Rapoport and Rapoport's rules. I really like this. Rapoport he had a hand in general systems theory, and he's a game theorist and a bit of a polymath by the sounds of it. But he says that there are some rules for conversations, and I think these rules help avoid getting into arguments or inflaming anger. And he says that in any conversation, you have to do things in this order. First of all, you attempt to re-express the other person's position so vividly, clearly, and fairly that they think, "I wish I thought of putting it that way." You attempt to re-express the other person's position so clearly and vividly and fairly that they think, "I wish I thought of putting it that way." And what that shows the person is, You've been listening. And what it also does is it opens up a conversation about, well, actually, no, I didn't mean that it like that, or no, I didn't. I don't think I said that. And then after you've done that, you've got to list the points that you agree on. So here's the things in your conversation that we appear to be on the same page. We're on the same page about this. We're on the same page about that. Because what we're doing is then we're building up a collaborative arrangement. Look, you know, there might be some things we don't agree on, but here's the things we agree on. And then building on that, mention anything you've learned from the other person's dialogue. All right, okay, so we agree on all these things, and I hadn't realized that that's how you felt about that thing. I hadn't realized that that was kind of how it felt for you when you thought about that. I hadn't realized that that's what you do on a Thursday afternoon or whatever. You know what I mean? And then only then are you permitted to say, right, here's the difficulty, here's the problem, here's what I'm seeing. Only then are you allowed to do that, and that just builds up trust, because at the end of the day, here's the thing. People are going to get angry. How that anger manifests, I think, is shaped by the relationship that you have formed with the person. So all of these kind of things, the collaborative language, Rapopos rules, all of that stuff that you do at the start, and this is and I'll leave you with this. This is the key thing I think I say when I deliver this session, and I say it right at the start, and I try and remember to say it at the end again. And the thing is, when you are in a difficult conversation, the thing that will transform that conversation, divert it, avoid it, whatever, is not what you do in the moment of the difficult conversation. It's what you've done before those difficult conversations have to happen, manifest. Now, I know there are sometimes difficult conversations have to happen right at the start of involvement. I get that, and these things still work, but obviously you haven't formed a relationship yet, or you've had to try and form one very quickly. The more spade work you put in at the start, the more groundwork you put in at the start, in terms of rapport building, relationship building. I mean, this is why, this sort of social work practice is what we're after, isn't it? That the more you can do there, the more effective the conversation will be when anger starts to kind of manifest itself. And I'm convinced that it shifts the direction that anger goes in. It also makes people within that situation, including yourself, if you've got a relationship, you're more malleable. You'll move yourself around a bit. You'll be more flexible within that relationship than you would be if you had no idea who this person was that was now telling you to do this, that, or the other. And as I'm fond of saying, if you haven't established that relationship, you are highly likely to be having the relationship with that person that they had in their heads, that they had with the previous social worker they had, or the previous professional that came in their lives. You have to establish your own relationship. So there you go. Collaborative language. Anger manifests. Anger's the emotion. It manifests itself as other things: frustration, aggression, those kind of things. Obviously, if you're unsafe, you've got to get out. But if you don't feel unsafe, or you're not unsafe, then collaborative language, Rapopos rules are all good things to apply. So there you go. Take care. See you soon.